Resource: Mutagen. Calling card. For over half a century, the Earth was ravaged by Tiberium. While the Global Defense Initiative and the Brotherhood of Nod fought for control of the crystal, it spread across the planet, transforming the surface of the Earth into a desolate, alien world. Welcome back, Commander. In 1995, a meteorite crashed into Italy. Within days, small green crystals began sprouting from plant-like pods near the impact, forming the first Tiberium field. Nearby trees lost their leaves, their bark taking on a fleshier complexion. Tiberium commonly grew around blossom trees, which rapidly replenished fields by releasing crystal-laden spores into the air. At first, the crystals were considered a mere scientific anomaly.
Tiberium continues to confound the scientific community, soaking up ground minerals and soil nutrients like a sponge.
With only a few short years, the infection had become global.
There are now more than 200 areas of the Earth affected by Tiberium deposits. Tiberium appears to be spreading by means of conveyance unknown.
GDI credits Dr. Ignacio Mobius, a foremost researcher in the field, with the discovery of Tiberium, naming it after the Tiber River near which it was found.
Viewers, just what Tiberium really is.
Well, let me put it this way, Eddie. The possibilities of Tiberium are limitless.
His primary employer was the UN-backed Global Defense Initiative, an international peacekeeping division that grew out of the Allied efforts in the Second World War. The Brotherhood of Nod was allegedly formed as early as 1800 BC. Nod emerged to a more public platform in the years preceding the arrival of Tiberium. It had become a political and religious quasi-terrorist group, on the surface interested in the unification of Third World nations. Tiberium is regarded by Nod with a fanatical degree of reverence, also claiming to have first discovered it, having named it after Tiberius Caesar. Suggestions that the Brotherhood had foreknowledge of the coming of Tiberium are considered by GDI to be unfounded.
This is the Pentagon. A full frontal attack with your strongest forces should render their military center of operation.
Yes. Power shifts more quickly than some people think. I am Kane.
Charismatic. Enigmatic. The Brotherhood of Nod is led by a man known only as Kane. It is said that he has been with the Brotherhood since the very beginning. His fate seems inexorably tied to Tiberium. Tiberium proliferates more quickly in temperate climes. By the late 1990s, Nod alone controlled almost half of the world's known supply, nearly double that of GDI, thanks to their fortuitous ties to equatorial nations. The first harvesting methods were developed by Nod. The crystals are collected by harvesters and taken to a refinery, where the precious minerals that form them are extracted via a centrifuge, or later by superheating them to melting point. Excess Tiberium could be stored in silos, though Nod had other, more creative ideas. Despite the danger the alien substance posed to terrestrial life, it became an extremely valuable resource within the initial years of its propagation. It wasn't until the first Tiberium War between GDI and Nod that the extent of its threat to life on Earth became clear.
Spores emitted by Tiberium-infected plants appear to be a source of Tiberium-related illnesses. The world scientific community is focusing its research on this deadly spore.
If you come into direct contact with Tiberium, the green matter will start to fuse with your skin within about 20 seconds. You'll feel an intense burning sensation, similar to touching a hot pan or spilling acid on your skin. A full-blown infection will manifest if you aren't treated immediately. Eventually your internal organs will shut down as Tiberium extends rigid crystalline runners throughout your body. If you breathe in the crystal, then it will become embedded in your lungs. Eventually you'll start coughing up blood and will hemorrhage to death. As the deaths from so-called tea poisoning mounted, some less conventional effects were revealed. Much like contact with flora could result in a blossom tree, extreme exposure of Tiberium to animal life, including humans, could trigger a complete cellular breakdown, turning the victim into what's known as a visceroid, a crude, amorphic mutant mass.
Spokesmen have confirmed that massive destruction to the alleged Sarajevo headquarters.
After more than 3 years of conflict, the First Tiberium War was won by GDI, following an orbital ion cannon strike on the Temple of Nod at Sarajevo, and the apparent death of Cain. While the Headless Brotherhood began to fracture from within, GDI was left to prepare for the future of life on this increasingly alien world. Despite GDI's best efforts, Tiberium continued to ravage much of the planet into the new millennium. The most common form it took was Tiberium riparius, the green crystal, but even in the most early days, mutations began to manifest. The most well documented of these, Tiberium vinifera, is visually reminiscent of riparius, albeit with distinctive blue crystals. Vinifera holds a greater concentration of valuable minerals than riparius, resulting in its shift in hue, though it is a far less common sight. Its value comes at a cost. Tiberium vinifera is highly volatile.
Tiberium is a new life form. Quite simply put, it seems to be adapting the Earth's terrain, foliage, and environment to suit its own alien nature.
Though there is little evidence as to whether Tiberium itself can truly be considered alive, Tiberium-based life forms became more and more common during the early 21st century. Mutant plant life continued to develop, and harvestable moss and sludge began to spread, and algae clogged waterways, carrying the crystal with it. Otherworldly Tiberium-based veins crept over the Earth, spreading forth from horrific vein holes. These veins were sighted during the latter part of the First War, but in the following decades grew worldwide with alarming alacrity. When agitated, the veinhole monster was known to release clouds of corrosive Tiberium gases. Heavily infected areas commonly played host to Tiberium fiends, vicious canine beasts the size of a small horse. Territorial and highly aggressive, the presence of a pack generally emptied nearby human settlements. There were reports of other unknown life forms around this time, but given how many lives went missing without known cause since the arrival of Tiberium, such ghost stories were not unheard of. By the 2020s, the Earth had been transformed. While humanity clung to life in the less afflicted areas, relocating displaced civilian populations to the Tiberium-free higher latitudes, much of the world had been overrun by the alien crystal. Even the atmosphere was saturated, choking on alien gases. Destructive ion storms flashed across the skies. With the vast majority of people still living in Tiberium zones, even human life was changed by its mutagenic properties. Although prolonged exposure to Tiberium remained fatal for most, the unlucky ones who survived found crystals growing on their bodies, slowly eating them from the inside out. Stronger than most humans during the earlier stages of the infection, these mutants were able to thrive in even the most inhospitable zones, living alongside and even training wild Tiberium fiends. Eventually, they would become almost dependent on Tiberium. Ostracized by the human race for their irreversible Tiberium poisoning, they formed an independent faction called the Forgotten, a nomadic tribe led by a researcher named Tratos, first known keeper of the Tacitus. He was acquired by Nod, and the Tacitus along with him.
In the name of Cain! In the name of Cain! In the name of Cain! Cain lives!
Somehow, Cain had survived the ion cannon strike, although the blast had left him horribly scarred. He spent much of the Second Tiberium War guiding the Brotherhood from the Nod Pyramid headquarters in Cairo, using real-time video manipulation to mask his disfigurement.
The first missiles landed here, starting some sort of chain reaction. The Earth is reformatting at the atomic level into pure toxic Tiberium. No one has ever seen anything like it.
The chemical missiles that crippled Europe in 2030 were sourced from Tiberium veins, but they were only a precursor. Nod intended to achieve what they called divination, the next stage of human evolution. Cain's world-altering missile was a warhead of concentrated Tiberium, built to force this evolution by covering the planet completely, making the Earth inhabitable only to Tiberium-based life. At the close of the war, the Nod Pyramid was besieged by GDI, and Cain was killed by Commander McNeil, preventing the firing of the missile, and Cain's true goal. Of course, Cain is not an easy man to kill. The years following the Firestorm crisis saw an evolution in Tiberium as it adapted to our world, seemingly in response to new GDI containment measures gleaned from the Tacitus. The crystals outgrew the plant-like pods from which they once spawned, and blossom trees withered and died, their purpose of early-stage propagation fulfilled. Tiberium had changed. This new strain, described as a self-replicating proton lattice, turned nearby material into more of itself, producing alpha, beta, gamma, and exotic radiation in the process. No longer restricted to just leaching minerals from the ground, Tiberium could now grow on anything, from anything.
Red zones have suffered the worst contamination and cannot support human life. Yellow zones are dangerously contaminated, but contain most of the world's population. Decades of war and civil unrest have left these regions in a state of social collapse. The remainder of the Earth's surface is unscarred by Tiberium outbreak. These blue zones are considered the last refuge and hope of the civilized world, and are under the protection of the Global Defense Initiative.
Excerpt from GDI Intel database. If you were to equip yourself with a hardened environment suit and stand in the middle of a red zone, you would see a landscape straight out of hell. The ground is a blasted and barren plateau of rock laced with veins of Tiberium that shine through with a malevolent green radiance. On the horizon are massive formations of pure Tiberium that have welled up through the surrounding Earth. Tilt your head and you'll contemplate a cloudy, tortured sky, alive with twisting patterns of shimmering light and flickers of lightning. If you wait long enough, you'll see an ion storm begin to form. These fireworks are accompanied by a howling, toxic whirlwind that scours the deserted ground and drives shards of Tiberium before it at insane speeds. Red zones are like the surface of an alien world. Scientists have speculated that Tiberium is actually a terraforming agent for an alien civilization, slowly transforming our planet into an environment suitable for beings that have evolved on a different planet. No definitive conclusions have been reached. Existence in the worst off yellow zones is not pleasant at all. A subsistence living is just the start. Tiberium contamination is a fact of life, and thousands die every year from inhaling microscopic crystals that are carried in smog, clouds of dust, and other airborne particulates. Tiberium may even fall out of the sky, suspended in raindrops, if the clouds overhead have passed through a red zone during or after an ion storm. One of GDI's more advanced tools during Tib War 2 was a disruptor tank. Developed at Hammerfest, its dish projected a harmonic resonance wave that would shake apart heavily armoured targets. Following the disruptor's decommissioning, the resonant frequency of Tiberium crystals was discovered. Correctly tuned, a sonic wave would completely break the crystal apart, leaving nothing capable of growth. For the first time since his arrival on Earth, GDI has an effective way to eradicate Tiberium. It was expensive, power-hungry, and short-range, ironically requiring Tiberium to power it. Nevertheless, it was a start. Sonic repulsor fields were swiftly deployed in blue zones, able to contain small outbreaks and prevent further spread, while reclamation efforts in yellow and red zones were undertaken with somewhat heavier equipment, primarily under the purview of GDI's OCOM branch. By the 2040s, with little significant Nod activity in the interim, GDI had reclaimed much of Germany from Tiberium, formally reclassifying it from a yellow zone to a blue zone. This new Eden marked the first restoration of a major population centre since the arrival of Tiberium. Hope at last for life on Earth. 2047. A Nod nuclear missile struck the GDSS Philadelphia during an annual energy summit, killing GDI's highest-ranking political and military personnel. GDI, predictably, retaliated, bringing its full might to bear against Nod and pushing the Brotherhood back, once again, to the Sarajevo Temple Prime. In a fateful repeat of events some 50 years ago, GDI fired the ion cannon upon the Temple of Nod.
Are you rolling? Okay. I'm outside Temple Prime, and the news here is terrible. King's plan has failed. We could see GDI soldiers stealing our Tiberium weapon, and just hours ago, there was a raid on the temple. We heard shots fired. So far, there has been no sign of Kane. We fear that he may still be trapped inside the temple. I'm getting word right now that GDI is... They're moving an ion cannon into position. If the Earth be transformed, let all those who believe in the power of Tiberium be transformed with it. Let the Earth be transformed.
Exactly as Kane had planned. The strike detonated a liquid Tiberium bomb beneath Temple Prime, fulfilling the purpose of the world-altering missile. Across the gulf of space, the fallout attracted the attention of envious eyes. The Skrin. Little is known about the invaders other than their obsession with, if not outright dependence on, Tiberium, what they call Ichor, the blood of the gods. While their planet-side forces varied in shape, they all seemed biomechanical in nature. Part exotic metal, part organic matter. The invaders required a constant supply of Tiberium-based radiation to function. This was provided by a relay node capable of planet-wide range, which had been constructed on the bank of what once was the Tiber River. Ground Zero. The severance of this radiation precipitates the immediate death of all linked Skrin forces. It is possible the Skrin are reliant on Tiberium the way terrestrial life needs oxygen for cellular respiration. They literally can't live without it. Taking into consideration the way living Skrin tissue is susceptible to Tiberium mutation in much the same way as humans, it does beg the question, were they always like this? Analysis of captured alien technology indicates the probability that the Skrin are responsible for the seeding of Tiberium on Earth by way of the meteor strike of 1995. Inops posit that the Skrin seed planets with Tiberium in this manner, then wait as the planet is terraformed. Given the efficacy of blossom trees at spreading crystal spores, it may be that inhabited planets are preferable targets. Once the infected planet presumably reaches terminal capacity, as indicated by a liquid Tiberium detonation, Skrin forces descend upon the planet, wipe out any remaining indigenous life forms, and then harvest. The Earth proved herself a challenge for which the invaders, a contingent of collectors and not conquerors, were ill prepared. The Third Tiberium War came to a close in the Italian Red Zone, at the site of a now impervious alien tower. Construction of 19 such towers was started in red zones around the world, but thanks to non-interference, assembly of Threshold 19 was completed, and the remaining Skrin forces escaped the Earth through it as GDI assaulted the relay node. Along with being an interstellar gateway, a threshold is capable of drawing enormous quantities of Tiberium from the planet's crust for transmission to something they call the I-Core hub. The damage this process would cause to a planet's surface is unknown. After the retreat of the Skrin, Threshold 19 seemingly went dormant. Of course, gates can be opened from either direction. Since the arrival of Tiberium 57 years ago, humanity has fought for its very right to existence on this planet. Nod has once again slunk back to the shadows, and Kane is missing, presumed at large. Between the Skrin invasion and the destruction of Temple Prime, nearly half of the planet is classified as heavily contaminated and unable to support terrestrial life. Perhaps it placed sanctuary to the Forgotten in their self-imposed exile. Perhaps they build their cities in the ruins of ours, safe from our fear of their lifeblood. We will meet again one day as we work to reclaim the planet, an effort to which GDI hopes the Forgotten will be understanding. Tiberium has become a fact of life. The planet may never be free of it, for despite its nature, Tiberium is a resource. The most valuable resource on Earth. My name is Stefan. Thank you so much for watching.
Nod's leader, a charismatic man we know only as Kane, has not been seen in years and is rumored to be dead, killed during the final days of the Second Tiberium War.
You can't kill the Messiah.